For the longest time, Kotaku has been the punching bag of the gaming industry. It's usually for good reason, as Kotaku are usually the ones who give game journalists a bad name. Luckily, when they actually do report stuff, they're really good. There are a few articles that dive extremely deep into some things you probably haven't even heard about, and they are super interesting to read. They still do great work on things like exposés. For example, they're the ones who uncovered just how badly Ubisoft treats their employees, and this article caused changes in Ubisoft's leadership for the good. These are articles that improve and make the gaming industry a better place. Unfortunately, Kotaku has taken a huge nosedive for the worse. Recently, there's been article after article that is just constantly negative and toxic. It's as if they don't even like video games because all they do is complain about them. Even the ones that are interesting, you can tell have changed. We'll be talking about a few articles today as an example. Before we move on, let's talk about a term called hate clicks. Hate clicks are when you make up something negative to make people angry at you. This gives you more marketing and more people are likely to click on your article. You see it on YouTube all the time. There are channels dedicated to saying negative things about popular games simply so people can get angry. What does this have to do with Kotaku? Stick around till the end to find out. And with that, let's get into our first example. I know that this article is almost a year old, but I think that it's very good at setting the mood. A few weeks before the PS5 came out, writer for Kotaku, Ian Walker, got a retail copy from Sony to review it. I just want you to keep in mind that somebody else whose job it is to read articles and to make sure they're okay to publish said, "Yep, this looks good." Now the review is pretty standard and entertaining until you get to the section titled, "Does it really matter?" I'm just going to pull this quote straight from the article and read it to you, but I'd be remiss to ignore all the reasons not to be excited for the PlayStation 5. The world is still reeling under the weight of the COVID-19 pandemic. There are more Americans out of work right now than any point in the country's history, with no relief in sight. Our healthcare system is inherently evil institution that forces people to ration life-saving medication like insulin and choosing suicide over suffering with untreated mental illness. As I'm writing this, it seems very likely that Joe Biden will be our next president. It's clear that the worst people aren't going away just because a new old white man is sitting behind the Resolute desk. Well, at least not this old white man. Our government is fine. Congratulations, Ian. This is exactly what I wanted to hear when I was reading a review of the PlayStation 5. Ian goes on and on for a good amount of time, so if you want to torture yourself, there's a link to the article in the description. Look, I didn't come here to read your opinion on the current state of the US government. I came here to read your opinion on the PS5. When I first saw this, I thought that there would finally be a much needed change in terms of Kotaku's editorial process. Unfortunately, this never happened. The time frame that all the stories from now on take place within a few weeks. The first article we're going to be talking about is the Call of Duty one. This article is titled, "Call of Duty Dev Visiting Europe Shooting Old Guns Was Hard Work." You know. Guess who wrote this article? No one but good old Ian Walker, the same person who wrote the PS5 review. One of the executives at Sledgehammer Games, Glenn Schofield, was interviewed by Edge magazine. Now Glenn is a very well-respected developer, since he is the creator of one of the best horror games ever made, Dead Space. So whatever Ian has to say is definitely worth the effort of typing out an entire article, right? No. This article is so pointless and toxic for absolutely no reason. To do research for COD World War II, when it was in development, Glenn visited many different places in Europe that would be featured in the game. He also tested out many different guns to make sure that they were authentic in-game. This kinda sounds like fun, right? Well, guess what? Ian thought so too. So he wrote in an article saying that he wasn't working hard enough on the game. Here is a direct quote from the article. What Schofield is talking about here sounds suspiciously like a vacation. Sure, it's probably hard to think of it that way when you're out there on work, but come on. Not back in the studio, documenting bugs for 12 hours a day, at barely more than minimum wage. Cory Barlog, director of the God of War games, sums it up best. He replied to the article on Twitter with the following: "It really seems like the message of this article is really doing game dev right if you're not overworked and miserable, bro." He said it perfectly. Ian thinks that you can't have fun on your job, and if you do, you should be made fun of. All Glenn is talking about is what they do for research when making games. Ian made it sound like he said it's the hardest work he's done in his entire life. Kotaku tried to twist and shape this article into something negative for absolutely no reason at all. Kotaku also has a serious case of the double standards. You will constantly see them complaining about how gamers are mean-spirited people and that Kotaku is morally superior. Yet, when they put out so many of these negative articles, when people call them out on it, they use it as evidence that all gamers are bad. They do complain about actual good things like how developers of games are overworked and get unnecessary toxicity. The problem is that Kotaku is probably the ones who are feeling this the most right now. A little while ago, they published an article titled, "2K very quietly launches a new XCOM game that looks like this is the exact type of stuff that they claim that they are against." The headline is so needlessly toxic that it hurts. Look, they aren't wrong, this game kinda sucks. If I were an XCOM fan, and if I were going to make a video about this game, I would probably title it something similar. The difference between me and Kotaku is that I'm not one of the most famous gaming outlets ever. There is a level of professionalism that comes with that, especially when you constantly put yourself on this moral high ground. You can't tell people to not do something and then do that same exact thing. The article itself isn't really that negative either. The author, Luke Plunkett, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, is clearly a huge fan of the XCOM games and feels angry about the way that his franchise is being treated. Still though, there is a person who's supposed to check these articles and make sure that they are okay to publish. This is called an editor. They gave the go-ahead on this article and published it probably knowing what the headline would do. They later did update the article's headline to something much better. I thought, okay, they realized they messed up. There's no way that something like this is going to happen again. Unfortunately, I was wrong. The final article we're talking about today is probably the worst article I have ever read. This article is written by Ethan Gach, sorry for pronouncing your name wrong. It's titled, "If you're going to preview Far Cry 6, at least do it right." Oh boy. Now you see, Kotaku was blacklisted by Ubisoft a few years ago. This means they don't get things like review keys and invitations to previews. So when Ubisoft invited all of these other outlets and YouTubers, Ethan got a little pissed that they didn't invite Kotaku. This article is basically him complaining that the other outlets like the game. Like, that is literally it. He was mad that they were truthful about their experiences with Far Cry 6. Don't worry, Ethan. Even if you did get to preview Far Cry 6, it still would have made this video anyway. And you know how and you know why? I'll use your words here. My pre-existing biases told me. Yeah, we're gonna talk about that too. Before the previews of Far Cry 6 came out, Ethan tweeted that we are just a few months away from the storm of discourse surrounding Far Cry 6. Apparently, he could predict this, again, his words not mine, with his pre-existing biases, whatever that means. Suddenly, the reviews do drop, and instead of a storm of discourse, the impressions from other outlets are lukewarm and positive. Ethan sees no problem, so he decides to create one. It gets worse. Ethan pulled quotes from other outlets' previews, but twisted them and used them out of context to make it seem like these outlets were blindly praising Far Cry 6. Instead, a lot of these previews were very critical of the game, but that's not what Ethan wanted you to think. For example, he pulled this quote from Mike Minotti's preview of Far Cry 6 for BG247. "Far Cry 6 is a huge game in every sense." Mike tweeted out the following after the article went live. "My Far Cry 6 preview is filled with criticisms of Far Cry 6, yet I'm quoted in this Kotaku story as being part of the game's press giving it a free pass." Basically, the majority of what Mike had to say about Far Cry 6 was not nice things, but Ethan still used it anyway. He did this not once, but many times throughout the article. Kotaku has written articles criticizing gamers who don't like certain reviewers simply because the reviewer liked a game they did not. I think that this is very reasonable and should be talked about. But this is exactly what you're doing right here, but just 10 times worse. You are throwing shade at other outlets because they like a game that you don't think will be good. God, this article is just so unbelievably bad. It's hard to talk about. Do I even need to say more? Well, I will, because I think it's important. I mentioned hate clicks at the beginning of the video and how they work. This is exactly what Kotaku is doing right here. They noticed if they wrote needlessly negative articles, their website gets more clicks. So Kotaku decided to keep doing it, despite it going against their core beliefs. I think that the worst thing that's come out of all of this is all of the good writing that is being overshadowed. Most of these writers don't want to write negative articles, but are unfortunately forced to in order to put food on the table. It creates this never-ending cycle of negativity that only grows and grows. This doesn't push the gaming industry forward, but instead holds it back. What I think needs to happen is Kotaku needs to put their money where their mouth is and act on their core beliefs. They also need a big change in their editorial system because clearly it is not working. This is all just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much that Kotaku has done over the years that I couldn't possibly fit it all in one video. I really do hope that one day we can see a better Kotaku, but unless there is a change, that day will never come.